Scientists have just discovered enormous deposits of gold, diamonds, copper, or the rare earth minerals that are in smartphones beneath your country. Is this good news? Not necessarily. You might think that becoming resource rich is a great way for a country to become prosperous, but this is not always the case. Some of the world's most resource-rich countries have struggled with corruption, dictatorship, economic instability, civil wars, and poverty. Instead of becoming wealthy, they have become trapped in a cycle of dependence and political turmoil. Economists have a name for this paradox, the resource curse. Today, I want to explore the resource curse. We'll discuss why having valuable natural resources can sometimes become a disadvantage and look at some of the world's best known examples. And we will do all of this while practicing your English listening comprehension and learning some new vocabulary. If you want to improve your English speaking, join the Thinking in English Conversation Club. Link is in the description. And actually, for the first 2 weeks of August, I am running a summer sale where you can get 20% off annual memberships. That is 20% off if you join for the entire year. You get a great discount and a whole year of English speaking practice. More information at the end of the episode. Here is today's vocabulary list. Resource. Resource. A valuable material or asset that can be used to produce wealth or meet people's needs, like oil, water, or minerals. For example, many countries depend on natural resources like oil and copper to earn export income. Institution. Institution. An established organization or system, such as courts, elections, or government departments, that helps a society function. As in, strong political institutions can reduce corruption and improve economic development. Diversify. Diversify. To develop a wider variety of industries instead of relying on just one. For example, Saudi Arabia is trying to diversify its economy by investing in tourism and technology. Overdependence. Overdependence. Excessive reliance on a single industry, product, or source of income. For example, the country's overdependence on oil made it vulnerable when prices fell. Price volatility. Price volatility. The tendency for prices to change rapidly and unpredictably. For example, price volatility makes it difficult for governments to plan their budgets. Corruption. Corruption. The dishonest or illegal use of power. For example, widespread corruption meant that much of the country's oil wealth never reached ordinary people. Prosperity. Prosperity. Wealth, success, and a high living standard. For example, the government hoped that its natural resources would bring long-term prosperity. If two countries existed side by side, and one discovered enormous reserves of oil, gold, or other valuable minerals, while the other country discovered nothing at all, which country would you expect to become richer? Most people would probably choose the country with the new natural resources. Valuable resources can be sold to other countries. This creates jobs, brings money into the economy, and more tax revenue for the government. In theory, this wealth can then be invested to improve the country and eventually spread to normal people. The problem, though, is that this doesn't always happen. Many countries with abundant natural resources, that is, countries with large quantities of valuable materials found naturally in the earth, do not become wealthy, or at least do not become wealthier than other countries. In fact, many grow more slowly. They have maybe more political instability, and could remain poorer than countries with fewer natural resources. This is known as the resource curse, or you might hear it called the paradox of plenty. A paradox is a situation that seems to contradict common sense. In this case, the paradox is that having more valuable resources can sometimes lead to worse economic and political outcomes. Natural resources are materials that occur naturally and can be removed from the ground and then sold. These include resources such as oil, natural gas, gold, diamonds, and copper. Today, resources like cobalt, lithium, and other rare earth minerals have become really valuable because they are essential for manufacturing things like batteries, smartphones, and electric cars. You might expect countries with these resources to become wealthy and powerful, but this is not guaranteed. Many resource-rich nations have struggled with political instability, meaning their governments frequently change or they face lots of conflict. Other countries with resources have become economically dependent on one single export. They rely almost entirely on selling one resource to earn money. Other countries have experienced widespread corruption, where politicians or other officials use their power to become personally rich. Some places have also seen increasing inequality. The country's wealth is shared very unevenly. Only a small number of people become extremely rich, but most people remain poor. The resource curse does not mean natural resources are inherently bad or always bad. There are several countries that are both resource-rich and highly prosperous. Norway is perhaps the most famous example. Australia and Canada also possess enormous quantities of valuable natural resources, but they have strong economies and stable political systems. So, natural resources are not always a problem. But if there is nothing inherently wrong with natural resources, why do so many countries struggle after discovering them? Economists usually point to a few different reasons or factors that can lead to a resource curse. One factor is overdependence. Overdependence on one industry or one resource. Overdependence happens when you rely on something excessively for your survival or success. You rely on it too much. For example, if you are a country which has huge oil supplies under your ground, it can be easy to rely on oil. You can earn billions of dollars by exporting that oil around the world. More and more people in your country can get jobs working in the oil industry or related industries. If oil is the most successful part of your economy, it's easy to just focus on oil. If oil is making so much money, why invest in anything else? Why invest in manufacturing, technology, agriculture, or tourism? Oil is much more profitable. But what happens if the oil price suddenly falls? Or if another country starts producing more oil? Or if the world gradually switches to renewable energy? Or there is an international crisis like COVID that stops exports? A country that depends on just one industry or one resource has very few alternatives. Its economy is very vulnerable because almost everything depends on the success of a single product. By contrast, countries with diversified economies, economies that produce many different goods and services, are much more resilient, much stronger. If one industry struggles, that's okay because other industries can continue growing. The prices of natural resources are often unpredictable. Economists describe this as price volatility. Volatility means prices change quickly and occasionally change dramatically. One year, resource prices might be very high because global demand is strong. When the price is high, the government gets lots of high tax revenues. They can afford maybe an expensive social program, or they can afford to build a new bridge. But next year, the demand for that resource falls, or perhaps the supply increases in another country, which causes prices to fall. This means the government income is going to fall as well. Maybe they can no longer afford those programs or infrastructure projects. And if this happens year after year, eventually the government will fall into a lot of debt, have a lot of unfinished bridges, unfinished social programs, and generally be struggling. Natural resources also affect politics. In many countries, governments get most of their money by collecting taxes from citizens and businesses. Because people pay taxes, they expect the government to spend their money responsibly. Spend it on hospitals or schools or roads. But in resource-rich countries, things are sometimes a bit different. It has been argued that governments are less accountable. They rely less on taxpayers. The government maybe doesn't need your income taxes because they own all the oil and all the metals under the ground, and they make their money by selling oil and metal. But because you're not paying taxes, because the government doesn't rely on you, they don't need to listen to you as much. This creates a lot of opportunities for corruption. Corruption is the dishonest use of power for personal benefit. There are many types of corruption. Politicians might award a mining contract to their friend or family members. Politicians might accept a bribe from companies hoping to gain access to valuable resources. Perhaps money that is supposed to be spent on schools might instead disappear into a private bank account in another country across the world. And of course, as you all know, natural resources often contribute to conflict. Different groups compete for control of resources because power and money comes from resources. There are so many examples of this and of these competitions becoming violent. Natural resources don't automatically cause wars or dictatorships, but they can make existing conflicts more intense or perhaps more likely to become violent. One of the most famous examples of a country suffering from a resource curse is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC. The DRC is perhaps not the best example of a resource curse country, but it is a very clear example. It is located in Central Africa, and it is one of the largest countries on the continent, actually in the entire world. The DRC is also perhaps the most resource-rich country on the planet. Definitely one of the most resource-rich countries on the planet. Beneath the DRC lies enormous deposits of copper, cobalt, gold, diamonds, tin, and coltan. Coltan is particularly important because it contains the metals we need to make smartphones, laptops, and other electric devices. The DRC is especially famous for its cobalt reserves. Cobalt is the metal that is used in rechargeable batteries, including those that are in electric cars. The DRC produces around 2/3, 66%, of the world's cobalt, making it the most important supplier of cobalt in the world. If you look at these facts, the fact the DRC has copper, cobalt, gold, coltan, diamonds, tin, all of these different metals, you might expect the DRC to be one of the wealthiest countries in Africa. But it is one of the poorest. Despite its extraordinary natural wealth, millions of people in the country live in poverty. Large parts of the DRC have experienced decades of violence and political instability. The resource curse alone can't explain the problems with the DRC. During the late 19th century, the territory became the personal possession of King Leopold II of Belgium. Under his rule, the local population was brutally treated, and they were forced to extract the resources, especially rubber and ivory, and then send these resources out of the DRC. millions of Congolese people suffered from forced labour and violence. When the DRC became independent in 1960, it inherited weak institutions. Institutions are the organisations and systems that help a country function: courts, government departments, the legal system. Building strong institutions takes time, and the DRC didn't have them. Belgium never built strong institutions. The country faced political crisis almost immediately. The DRC has experienced dictatorships, corruption, foreign intervention and wars. There's been a lot of armed conflict over mining areas because the valuable resources in mines can be sold to buy weapons and finance their military operations. Today, the situation in the DRC is really complex. The world's growing demand for electric vehicles and rechargeable batteries has made cobalt and copper super valuable. This creates opportunities for the DRC, but also competition over who controls these resources and who benefits from their sale. The DRC's extraordinary mineral wealth has made its problems far more difficult to solve. It has been cursed by its resources. Countries on several different continents have experienced similar problems. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, the country with the biggest population, and also one of Africa's largest oil producers. Oil was first discovered in large quantities in the 1950s, and now oil is a really large share of Nigeria's export earnings and government revenue. But Nigeria has struggled to convert oil wealth into economic prosperity. Because oil has been so profitable, other industries, especially manufacturing, have received less investment. People invest in oil, so they don't invest in manufacturing. This has made Nigeria's economy vulnerable when oil prices fall. Nigeria also faces serious problems with corruption. Quite often in the news you will see stories of billions of dollars in oil revenue disappearing through fraud or illegal activities. Some parts of Nigeria have benefited greatly from oil production, some people as well, but most ordinary Nigerians haven't seen as much improvement in their daily lives as you would expect. Furthermore, oil is a damaging natural resource. It has polluted Nigeria's rivers and farmland, making it more difficult for local people to live because their farms are now polluted. Another example is Venezuela. Venezuela possesses some of the largest oil reserves in the world. For a long time, oil exports were a big part of the government's income, and oil exports financed Venezuela's really ambitious spending programs. Venezuela, of course, is a socialist country, and they had really ambitious public spending programs. But the success of the oil industry created dependence. When global oil prices started to fall, Venezuela's economy entered a severe crisis. The government revenues collapsed and inflation reached extraordinary levels. Of course, the resource curse is only part of this story. Political decisions, economic mismanagement, international sanctions, and many other things also contributed to Venezuela's crisis. But the fact the country was so reliant on oil made these problems far more severe. Angola is again another example. Following the end of its long civil war, Angola experienced rapid growth because oil production expanded. For a while, it was one of Africa's fastest growing economies. A large amount of the government's revenue comes from the oil sector, but that means changes in oil prices have a really big impact on Angola's public finances. When the oil prices fall, Angola's government spending has had to be slashed, reduced, and that has affected its public services. Many economists argue that Angola still needs to diversify its economy by investing more in agriculture or manufacturing or other industries. Not all examples involve oil. During the 1990s, Sierra Leone became internationally known for its diamond industry. Diamonds are very valuable, but during the country's civil war, different groups started to take control of diamond mines and then sell these diamonds illegally to buy weapons and continue fighting. These diamonds became known as blood diamonds or conflict diamonds. These were diamonds sold to finance armed conflict. So if a country discovers oil or other valuable materials, is it automatically going to become corrupt or economically dependent on that resource? No. Some countries have managed their resources really well. Instead of allowing their resources to dominate their economies, they have used it to build prosperity. The country most often praised by economists is Norway. In the late 1960s, large oil and gas reserves were discovered underneath the North Sea. This means that Norway is one of the largest exporters of oil and natural gas in the world. But unlike other oil-producing countries, Norway has avoided the resource curse. One reason is that Norway already had really strong democratic institutions before oil was discovered. It had a stable political system, an independent legal system, low levels of corruption, high levels of public trust. This meant the government could manage its new wealth effectively. Norway created a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund is a government-owned investment fund. Instead of spending all of their money earned from oil immediately, Norway invests it. They invest it in companies, property, financial markets. Oil and gas will eventually run out. But by investing their profits, Norway is providing income for the future. In fact, Norway's sovereign wealth fund is the largest in the world, worth well over $1 trillion. Another success story comes from Botswana. When Botswana became independent from Britain in 1966, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. Shortly after independence, they discovered diamonds. Different governments have invested their diamond revenues into infrastructure and healthcare and education. Botswana has also maintained relatively stable institutions and has kind of avoided some of the large-scale corruption you might see in places like Nigeria. The country's not perfect, of course not. Botswana still faces problems like inequality, but it has experienced a fast rate of economic growth, and it's not just reliant on diamonds. Saudi Arabia has historically relied heavily on oil exports. Oil transformed Saudi Arabia. It funded its development and allowed the Saudi Arabian government to build massive cities and infrastructure. But Saudi Arabia realized the world was going to stop using fossil fuels eventually as they tried to tackle climate change and expand renewable energy. If the world stops using oil, Saudi Arabia's economy would become vulnerable. To prepare for that possibility, the government has started to diversify its economy. It's expanded into tourism, entertainment, finance, technology, manufacturing. Projects like NEOM, which is a futuristic planned city, and major international sporting events, the World Cup in 8 years' time, are part of this strategy to reduce Saudi Arabia's dependence on oil. They also have a sovereign wealth fund like Norway, which is one of the world's biggest investors. Some economists argue that the phrase resource curse is misleading. Oil or diamonds or copper doesn't make a decision. They don't create corruption or weaken economies. The real issue is not natural resources. It is the institutions, the organizations, laws, systems that are in a country. Things like having an independent legal system or honest elections and effective government departments or a free press. Countries with strong institutions are generally better able to manage their wealth. Governments can collect taxes and then invest their money and enforce laws and stop corruption from becoming widespread. Countries with weak institutions struggle to manage their resources effectively. Large amounts of money can be stolen. Corruption can be common, and the government might focus on the resources more than the wider economy. If a country already has strong institutions, resources might strengthen its economy, like Norway. But if it has weak institutions, it might make it worse. History also should be important. Many countries facing the resource curse share colonialism. Countries like the DRC, Nigeria, and Angola, they had decades of colonial rule before becoming independent. Colonial governments focused on taking resources, rather than building local institutions. When these countries became independent, they inherited systems designed for taking resources out of the country, not for reinvesting the money in the country. This doesn't explain everything, but it helps us understand why some countries face greater challenges from the beginning. So here is today's final thought. If your country discovered trillions of dollars worth of natural resources tomorrow, would it become automatically rich? No. We've seen the answer is no. Natural wealth is not a curse, but it's also not a good thing. The same oil reserves that transformed Norway into one of the wealthiest countries in the world has contributed to political challenges in many other countries. The same diamonds that financed Botswana's development fueled conflict in Sierra Leone. Countries that invest their resource profits into education, strong institutions, fighting corruption, and diversifying their economies are more likely to become prosperous, to develop long-term prosperity. Countries that don't do this will be trapped in cycles of dependence and instability. But what do you think? If your country suddenly discovered one of the world's largest oil fields or mineral deposits, do you think it would use that wealth wisely? Or do you think it would become a victim of the resource curse? Let me know by leaving a comment. You can comment on YouTube or on Spotify. And if you're interested in improving your English speaking, you should join the Thinking in English Conversation Club. It's a place where we can practice speaking English with other Thinking in English members. It's a safe space where you can improve your confidence and talk about recent Thinking in English episodes. I'm actually running a 20% discount for the first 2 weeks of August. You can join annually with 20% off your membership. You can either join the English listener level if you want to listen to extra episodes, bonus episodes, or you can join the English learner level if you also want to join the conversation club. The link to Patreon is in the description or on the screen if you're watching YouTube, or you can search patreon.com/thinking in English. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll speak to you next time. Goodbye.